A24 is one of the biggest film studios in the business, with over 112 movies in its catalog, with many certified classics such as Good Time, Minari, Moonlight, and so much more. They're a powerhouse of the film industry, with an emphasis on creativity and surrealism. So many wonderfully weird movies are owned by this company, and it's almost terrifying to think of the state Hollywood would be in were it not for A24's consistent drive to find unique stories. They have such a great eye for these small little films and rich and unique stories that may have not found it to the big screen if it wasn't for them, stated Colin Farrell in 2017. More importantly, however, is their impact on the horror genre. It's no surprise that horror movies have taken a huge dip in quality throughout the years. There's a dizzying number every year, but it's become increasingly difficult to find good ones among them. When you do, however, there's a good chance A24 had something to do with it. A24 first dipped its toes into the horror genre with the film Enemy, directed by Denis Villeneuve and starring Jake Gyllenhaal in 2013. Loosely based on the novel The Double by Jose Saramago, Enemy is a shockingly disturbing film that analyzes infidelity and identity in some very unique ways. The movie was given some mixed feedback, but overall pretty positive. This would be a recurring trend seen in their next 5 releases, which were titled Under the Skin, The Rover, Life After Beth, and Tusk. Then in 2014, A24 acquired one of the most bone-chilling films to date, Ex Machina. The film essentially feels like a fully fleshed out and expanded Black Mirror scenario, showing the terrifying real-world possibilities behind robotics and artificial intelligence. The film was given a huge amount of praise and was a big milestone in Oscar Isaac's career, the man we now know as Moon Knight. Momentum was starting to gather, and A24 didn't let up. The following year of 2015 would bring with it another jam-packed collection of brilliant films that challenged the horror genre in some incredibly bold ways. Ironically though, they didn't start the year with the ground running. The first horror film of 2015 that they acquired, called Dark Places, directed by Gilles Paquette. A few months later, however, they had another hit on their hands with the film Room, a horrifying story of a woman kidnapped, raped, and forced to raise a child in a room for 8 years. The film swept award shows, winning over 16 awards, including Brie Larson, who played the main character, winning the Academy Award for Best Actress. A month after Room's release, we got The Lobster, starring Colin Farrell, which could be best described as extreme speed dating. It was widely hailed for its wonderfully nuanced performances and unique narrative, and was nominated for several awards. These 3 films, though deeply disturbing and having many elements of the horror genre, were primarily thrillers at heart. That would all change with A24's next release with the film The Witch, written and directed by Robert Eggers, and served as their first all-out endeavor into the dark and scary world of horror. The film was a retelling of a 14th century folktale that focused on, you guessed it, witchcraft, and would also serve as Anna Taylor-Joy's breakout role. It would also serve as Robert Eggers' first big break in Hollywood. It wouldn't be until his second film with A24 that Eggers would shoot up to stardom. But we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit here. More on that later. Right off the heels of The Witch came Krisha, directed by Trey Edward, a horror film about a woman facing old demons. It was considered another solid entry in A24's ever-growing repertoire. Keep in mind, we're still talking about 2015. And guess what? There was still more. After Krisha, we got The Green Room, a neo-Nazi horror film written and directed by Jeremy Solner and starred Patrick Stewart. If you haven't seen it, I think that fact should be enough of a pitch. A24 would end the 2015 year of bangers with a whimper though, with the film The Black Coat's Daughter, which had some pretty mixed reception. The following year would be a pretty quiet one in terms of horror releases for their company, with the only release being The Monster, which was also received with mixed criticisms. The first half of 2017 saw a couple more releases, It Comes at Night and Woodshock, which flew under a lot of people's radars. Then came The Killing of a Sacred Deer in October, which fared much better among critics and audiences alike. Also, it featured Colin Farrell and Barry Keoghan, who are now barely recognizable as the Penguin and the Joker in Matt Reeves' Batman universe. That would wrap up 2017, another relatively tame year of horror releases for the distribution company. But consider these the calm before the storm that came in 2018 in the form of Hereditary. Now this is the big one, widely regarded as one of the scariest films of the decade. Outstanding cinematography and jaw-dropping performances, this was a film that would stick with you long after the credits rolled. And for Ari Aster, writer and director of the film, it would serve as an amazing debut. You could say him and Robert Eggers have a pretty great relationship with the company. After that, A24 would release a pretty interesting project. A bad one, but an interesting one nonetheless. It was a film called Slice, which had Chance the Rapper playing the lead and Zazie Beetz, who is now most popular for her roles in Joker and Atlanta. After that came CLIMAX, directed by Gaspar Noé, a French horror film that did pretty well overall. A24 wrapped up 2018 with the release of In Fabric, a story about an evil dress that people dug overall. It was a little more on the silly side, but this wasn't something A24 ever shied away from. On the contrary, they'd actually get a bit wackier with some of its releases in the following years. So 2019 starts with the film A Hole in the Ground, which wasn't too bad. Then after that, we get 2 big ones, the return of Ari Aster and Robert Eggers. Aster came out first, putting out the film Midsommar. It's another unique story that will also leave you tossing and turning in bed at night. It's also probably one of the most colorful horror movies I've ever seen. It starred Florence Pugh as the lead, who did an excellent job bringing the character to life. Between that and the film Fighting with My Family, 2019 was a huge year for the actress, and the two are largely responsible to why you're seeing a lot more of her nowadays. Astor tagged in Eggers, who released The Lighthouse, starring Willem Dafoe and Robert Pattinson. So that thing I said earlier about A24 films getting a bit more silly, this is mainly what I was talking about. This film is quite unlike anything you've seen before. Haunting, hilarious, and just a downright blast to watch. The dynamic between Dafoe and Pattinson is excellent, and you can tell the two had a great time on set. The two were already well established before for a plethora of great roles, but to me it was this film that really showed their range. It was given several nominations with a couple of wins, such as the Bodil Award for Best American Film and the Fire Presky Award at Cannes. Following The Lighthouse came Saint Maud, directed by Rose Glass, an interesting story that followed a woman with a dark past who was dooming herself to repeat it. This also fared pretty well with audiences and critics, and ended yet another strong year for A24. 2020 saw 0 releases, so we're skipping on over to 2021, which kicked off with the film False Positive, directed by John Lee. After came Lamb, another extremely bizarre story from the mind of Voldemir Johansson. And finally, here we are in 2022. The first movie we got was X, directed by Ty West, a good old campy horror flick that starred Kid Cudi? It's a pretty good time. And the latest film, which arrives May 20th, is Men, directed by Alex Garland, who also directed Ex Machina, so expectations are pretty high for this one. Even better, we're getting the third film from Ari Aster this year titled Disappointment Boulevard, starring Joaquin Phoenix. It's looking like A24 is set to take the helm in gathering another set of stellar horror films this year. It's an exciting time to be a horror fan, and it's even better seeing the return of some of these horror writers who are reshaping the genre as we know it. So what do you guys think? Is A24 bringing horror back to its best? Let me know if there's any we missed. Thank you so much for watching, and please subscribe.